The Silly Goose Gang Podcast.
Okay, here we are, folks. Episode 27, Silly Goose Gang Podcast. And we're absolutely delighted to be joined this evening by Jason Gardner, Navy SEAL Command Master Chief, Silver Star recipient, and leadership instructor at Echelon Front. Jason, thank you a massive amount for joining us tonight.
Hey, Chris and Ali, thanks for having me.
Yeah, see, he said Chris first. He knows before we even start that I'm more important than you are, Ali.
Is that how it works?
You guys are laid out left to right on my screen.
It's always a real pleasure, Jason, to speak to military guys, and especially somebody as decorated as you are. I find you guys have a real world perspective on everything. You understand the good and the bad, and it's always a real pleasure to speak to you guys. So, thanks for taking the time. I guess just diving straight in. I guess the world needs more of your leadership skills at the moment. There seems to be no real leaders taking, certainly political leaders taking, any real charge of anything at the minute.
It's just so difficult to actually get a good handle on what's going on and what the right moves are for our leaders. And, over here in the U.S. where we have a two-party system and things have gotten extremely polarized, that if somebody that says something that makes sense over in the other party from whatever, party you've decided you're in, then they're automatically wrong just because they're in the other party, not necessarily because they're wrong. And unfortunately, it's devolved to the situation where what are the soccer hooligans? They're like syndicates or something over there. And, somebody in the other team says something and then it's like, well, they're automatically wrong. So it is interesting. I found that this is a kind of time where I'm paying a little bit of attention to what's going on in the big picture, and that by I mean globally and in the nation, and paying a lot more attention to myself and my family, and something that I'm putting a filter of kindness on every aspect of how I interact with other people, and I find that to be helpful.
Do you ever look at, because you're in America, so we'll talk about American presidents. Do you ever look at the way that they handle a situation and, go, fuck, that's not how you should deal with it? Just how you respond to the press, or how you respond to a situation that, just because of COVID or because of the riots. Do you look at these individuals and just go, we could do better?
Sure. Absolutely. And so when a political leader gets up there and points a finger and says, this is happening because of that person over there, or because of this organization over here, I just kind of roll my eyes. And I think everyone would like to see the political leader who stands up there and says, hey, you know what? We didn't invest a bunch of money, and let's use COVID as an example. We didn't invest a bunch of money in research for these COVID strains because we have a limited budget, and I need to look at where we're going to spend money. And I thought that these other things were higher priorities than this COVID was, but obviously I was wrong, and we need to readjust what our priorities are. That would be really refreshing. I don't think that I've seen any leaders saying that. I have seen a few, but in general, not a lot. And we'd all be better served if the leaders took that kind of angle. Again, the other thing I'm real careful about is the media that I pay attention to feeds to my biases, and they'll say certain people said certain things and completely take it out of context or anything else. And when I research it, what they say, I'm like, I can't believe anyone would say that. Grr. And then look into it and say, well, that's not actually what that leader said, or it was taken out of context. So more and more, I find myself just turning it all off. When I'm on social media, I'm more interested in looking at pictures of somebody's kid doing something cool or a nice outing that they had more than a lot of this manufactured outrage we're in the middle of.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, isn't it? You know, the way the social media is set up, it either drives things to you that you're interested in, or you've shown an interest in, or something that they know you're not interested in, but it's going to provoke some form of reaction and getting you resharing it, you know, commenting on it, whatever it might be. And I think, you know, it's one of possibly the benefits that came out of this situation is that people are maybe starting to cotton on to that a little bit more. That, you know, it is driving things purely for the outrage to get you reacting to it. And as always, as we said a few times on this podcast, quite often the truth lies somewhere in the middle, that grey area that doesn't often get talked about because of the polarisation. I know you've got the two-party system in the States there, Jason. Even over in, you know, in the UK and Scotland, you know, it's very similar because we've got the Scottish devolved government, and they are doing something completely different to the overall Westminster government in London. And it's coming down to, you know, Westminster are doing the best thing. No, the Scottish government are doing the best thing. No, the Scottish government are doing it bad. And it's just bouncing around everywhere instead of that middle area where people go, actually, you know, pros and cons on both sides. Some things have been done well, some things haven't. It's just getting messy.
It's,
right. And you know, a lot of it's just clickbait. There's something outrageous that they're trying to get you to click on. For the media, it drives ratings. They know that if they spike your blood pressure and they get you alarmed about something, that you're going to tune in and pay attention, and that's where they can charge advertising dollars. So they're always going to, the media is always going to show stuff that's going to scare us a little bit because it drives their ratings. I don't think it's always been that way and always will be that way. And so if you keep that in mind, it just helps not having your blood pressure spiked all day long, every day.
Do you see, or do you know any really great military leaders, Jason, that you think should and could go on to run? You know, because it seems like those guys seem to make, you know, the best leaders overall.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to tell you about that. Politicians are not leaders, they're bureaucrats. And I don't know that I worry about someone's motives if they're looking for a job in politics. Because again, once you join one party, half the people turn you off. And so I feel like a lot of our great military leaders can affect more change and influence more people outside of politics, because it's just the whole business is really messy, and it's not set up to bring the best out of it. And I look at what a lot of our politicians do, and they just sit around and vote on a bunch of rules, and that's not leadership. That's being a manager, really. I think the real leaders are outside of politics, and they're influencing people en masse. Like, you know, General Mattis, just I read his book here recently. Fantastic book. Everyone I spoke to that's ever worked within like 2 circles of influence of him absolutely thought that he was an amazing leader, great man. Would I want to see him go into politics? No, because as soon as he does that, half the people quit listening to him, and I don't think it works. And I think that he makes us all better people from the position he's at now. So there you have it. I hope that none of them go into politics, and I'm not sure that politicians are legal or are actual leaders.
Yeah. That's a good point. There's a Scottish comedian called Billy Connolly who famously said back in the 80s, the desire to be a politician should ban someone from life for ever being a politician. Which kind of ties up. You know what I mean? Like if you want to do that job, that bans you from ever being that person that gets that job.
Exactly. I know, like in the military, when they look for a young officer to become an admiral's aide, they always pick the guy that doesn't want to do it. So he's not there just to, further his own career. That's, Jocko was chosen to become an admiral's aide and was admiral's aide for a period of time because they knew that he wouldn't want to do it. And he would represent the admiral the best way possible as not just being like a yes man up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So going the opposite way now, Jason. So you come from a military family, is that right?
Yeah, my dad served in the Marine Corps for 23 years. He was a JAG officer, which is an attorney in the Marine Corps. And so I grew up in a military family, and it was something that I knew I wanted to do from a very young age. And my path just didn't lead me to the Marine Corps. I decided to go into the Navy, and a lot of it was on my father's advice, where he knew that I had a real interest in the water and the maritime stuff, and he advised that I look at the SEAL teams, especially because it was at the time closed loop, where you go into the SEAL teams and you can stay there for your whole career. And the Marines back in the early 90s, they didn't have that option. So that was one of his angles. And again, my oldest boy, his path took him to the Army, and he's driving tanks. And it's a good thing, but it's all good.
So what year did you sign up, Jason? That would have been early 80s. Would that be right?
Yeah, I enlisted under our delayed enlistment program in 1987.
Oh, okay. So that means you must have had a lot of Vietnam vets around when you were getting in.
Yeah, there was a good amount of Vietnam vets around that I was exposed to, that were mentors of mine coming up in the SEAL teams. And so that was great, because we went a huge swath from basically 73 or 74 when the last SEALs were in Vietnam until, I think Grenada was the big next combat. And, you have to be careful with lessons learned just by like a 3-day or Panama, something where you're not under sustained combat, because just because something worked once doesn't mean it works every time. And so those Vietnam vets were just a huge wealth of knowledge, because they'd had prolonged exposure to combat and saw things that, here they could definitively tell you, here's how people are going to react when they're being shot at. Here's what works. Here's what, we see that didn't work.
Yeah. It's that institutional memory, isn't it, that you get in organizations like, the armed forces. I'm thinking my granddad was in the Royal Marines in the UK during the Second World War. And I remember him talking about that. His group had gone through the Second World War. Some of them had served in Aden, some of them had served in Korea, along with the US troops. A small amount went out there. And he said there was that institutional knowledge of kind of 3 campaigns that helped when young Marines were then joining. They were kind of told, look, this isn't from a book, this isn't from an exercise, this is from the real world. And, you can't buy that kind of knowledge in any way, shape or form. And I think it's important that you lean into that.
Absolutely. We were right on the verge of losing that institutional knowledge, because there were some tactics that we started to use that really weren't good combat tactics. And we found that out later, but it's because, the Vietnam vets had kind of eclipsed that, all of them had done all the time they could in the military, and they weren't around to say, hey guys, what you're doing isn't a great idea, and it won't work when you're getting shot at. And then there were some lessons that we just had to relearn after being in real combat, because you'll get into training scenarios, and this is why a lot of traditional martial arts ever did good during the UFCs, right? Because they just made assumptions about how people were going to react. They're like, okay, well, I'm going to touch you in this pressure point behind your ear, and you're going to pivot 45 degrees to your left, and then I'm going to, do an X block, grab your wrist, turn you around, and you're going to do all this stuff. Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, on the mats when you're doing jujitsu, and that's what's wonderful about it, is you're going full speed,
Yeah.
and you're going, oh, this is how a person most of the time is going to react to me grabbing their arm, grabbing their gi here, and all those things. And you know, I've got that light bulb coming over my head, and with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm just a white belt with one stripe. You know, I don't have a lot of experience, but I have enough to know that based on my prior experience with traditional martial arts, we just made all these huge assumptions about what people are going to do and what's going to work.
So
not there.
Me and Ali are both blue belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it's we regularly say it's we're simulating murder. That's essentially what we're doing. It's not karate. You know, I'm going to try and fuck you up, and you have to stop me. It's real world. So yeah, it's we can relate to that completely. It's such a good martial art. It's the most fun. But what made you get into the jiu-jitsu? Was that working at Echelon Front? Is that something that got you into it, or?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, obviously, it's really part of our culture at Echelon Front. I got back into it before I'd gotten out of the Navy, just because Jocko was reinforcing it so much. I'd actually started training in the early '90s with the same guy that got Jocko into jiu-jitsu, but stuff just came up in life and I lost interest, and I prioritized like surfing and family and other stuff over jiu-jitsu, and didn't get back into it until much later. But it's something that, well, we're way up in northern Washington, right on the Canadian border, and the closest jiu-jitsu gym to us is in Canada. And it's the border's closed right now, so we're kind of like on hold as a family for training, unfortunately. But it's something that, you know, my wife really enjoys it, my kids love it. It's good all the way around.
Yeah, that's cool that they're all involved.
Yeah, that's one of the great things. As Chris knows as well, my 17-year-old son trains jiu-jitsu with us, and it's been a massive benefit to him as a young teen going through, as a lot of teens go through, difficult times and, you know, things that you deal with when you're a teenager. And being on the mats has been good for him. It's been good for him to be, you know, around adults that aren't teachers, and, you know, because that's your really only exposure to adults as a teenager. It's probably been good for him to see me not just as dad, and to get, you know, Chris giving me a bit of hassle and me giving a bit of hassle back, and, you know, that stuff that adults do, you know, adult men do, where, you know, you give each other shit, you give each other a bit of banter, you give each other hassle, and they come back and it's, no one runs away crying about their hurt feelings. It's just, you know, it's just one of those things, and I think that's important as well for a young kid.
No egos and humbleness. You can't have an ego in the mats.
Oh, right. And you know, your son's going to learn so much just from the example that you're setting him in there, on how he deals with failure and loss, and watching all that stuff is fantastic. It's a good thing, you know. And the other thing you mentioned about just having exposure to other adults, because you're going to find that at some point your kids just turn you off, and everything you say to them is just white noise. And then they'll have a coach or a family member or a teacher say the exact same thing that you've been saying to them every day, but they'll listen to it. And at the end of the day, who cares where they get the message from, as long as they're getting it? And so having exposure to other adults and interacting with them is a great way to do it. One thing we really try to work with our kids a lot is, you know, getting them to have good eye contact and have conversations with adults. And so, because like if you meet a kid and the kid's head down, he's not talking to you, or she isn't talking to you, you really don't want to interact with them. But that it's definitely a better thing.
we're quite lucky. Our coach John, I know John will be listening to this at some point, so shout out to John. He's a really good guy. I know that Ali's kid takes a lot from him as well. He's a crazy old man. He's a crazy old man, and he's a great coach now. Not just a great jiu-jitsu coach, but a great life coach. Not just jiu-jitsu, but a great life coach. So yeah, we're lucky that we have that at our gym. So the younger guys are lucky to learn from those guys.
Absolutely, and the more exposure they can have to it, the better off they're going to be.
Yeah.
Such an early age, because your kids are quite young, aren't they? Or you're the ones that aren't driving tanks at the minute. I was referring to.
Yeah.
Quite young, aren't they?
9 and 8, and so it's great. And they started training with the teenagers and the school we go to, Kootenai, BJJ up there in Roslyn, Canada, and just have a great time.
Yeah,
it's good.
So I'm going to these conversations tend to jump all over the place, so I apologize for that. But yeah, so just going back now, so what was your first deployment?
So my first deployment was in 1989, and I was deployed. They used to deploy a SEAL platoon on a ship, and we would go out on a regular deployment with the amphibious readiness group, and they call that an ARG. And so we would be out there basically as a contingency force with a bunch of Marines for anything that happened in the world. And 1990, midway through our deployment, Iraq invaded Kuwait. We wound up doing a 10-month-long deployment. Not a lot of direct action for my platoon. We did board several Iraqi tankers to stop the flow of fuel, but that was really it. We had several targets. Every target that we were getting ready to go hit, the Iraqis would either abandon or surrender just prior to us hitting those targets, and so it kind of fell apart. Now, my first real combat deployment would have been in 1995 to Somalia. And this was 2 years after the big Black Hawk Down incident that was with the Rangers and the Delta Force guys that were there. And that was pretty sporty.
You were a sniper at that time, weren't you, Jason?
Yes, I was a platoon sniper. I was again deployed with an amphibious readiness group, and the Marines were tasked with going in and pulling the UN forces out of Somalia because everyone was leaving. And then we were able to augment the Marines and come in, both of our snipers, myself and the other sniper, and then we brought like 6 or 7 guys from from our platoon to our positions to do comms, be our medics, spotters, all that stuff.
Yeah. So mid-90s then, how much, this is one of these questions that sometimes pop into my brain, how much of the guys that were joining the SEALs at that time were influenced, particularly the younger guys, maybe influenced by the old Charlie Sheen and Michael Biehn movie, Navy SEALs? Because that was my first, as a teenage, you saw the movie?
Yeah.
Charlie Sheen and Michael Biehn. Did anyone watch that and think, that's what we want to do? That's, almost like a recruitment video, for want of a better phrase?
Yeah, I mean, that's what, Hollywood portrays stuff in a certain manner. And absolutely, there were guys that saw that and said, hey, I want to go in and do that. And the only drawback to the movie is they make it seem like those guys were the only SEAL platoon in the world and they were getting to operate all the time. But you just got to grind it out. You'll get those opportunities to go to combat if that's what you're looking for. You just have to do the time in the teams. But I think that was the case,
I think if you had 9 deployments, it must have been almost like you were deployed all the time.
Yeah, stretch across a 30-year career. It was I would do, typically the way my career laid out, I'd do like 3 or 4 or 3 deployments in a row, then go to a training command, take a break for a couple, 3 or 4 years, or 2 or 3 years, then come back to a command, do another deployment or 2 more deployments, and then that's what had happened. I know for I did 4 of those deployments in the last 10 years, so it was towards the end there. It started to grind pretty heavily. I'm lucky that my wife is good with that.
Yeah.
What was the difference? Because obviously you'd be in. I would imagine it'd be quite unique to have done first Gulf War and then second Gulf War. What was the difference in the Iraqi military and their capabilities? Was there a massive difference over that 10, 12-year period?
So I wasn't there for the push up north, but I think that the difference is that the first war was a conventional war. The second one was fighting an insurgent war, which is really, really difficult because the insurgents are purposely trying to blend in with the civilians. And a lot of times they're hiding behind the civilians, and they're just making it more difficult because they know what your rules of engagement are. So like when I was in Iraq in 2005, I don't think that, I was deployed to Ramadi for a period of time there, and I'm not sure how many times that I was shot at directly, but every time we rolled out of the gate, the improvised explosive devices, the mines were a real threat. And that was super frustrating in that, okay, hey, our convoy just hit another IED. There were 3 guys wounded in the truck in front of me, and these people are saying they don't know who put it up there, and it's like trying to grab smoke with your hand. It's not something you can really bust off into. I did a couple of several sniper overwatch positions, and we'd go out and we'd go, okay, well, this is a bad area where they're planting improvised explosive devices, at least 2 a week, or there were 2 there in the last week, and they would just shift around. So we'd go out and set up an overwatch position, in a sniper hide somewhere on that route or wherever it was where we thought we were going to be able to get some insurgents. You get all set up, and then you're out there, right? You're out in town. You're basically, if you get on the radio and you need help, it's going to be 20, 30 minutes before somebody can get back out to you. So there's 8 of you out there alone and probably nervous because it has happened before in Ramadi where entire sniper elements got rolled up and wiped out. And so you're nervous about that. It's definitely sketchy. And then sun comes up, and you're convinced that everybody out on the street is some kind of insurgent. So I'd be up on the rifle. I'm like, oh, okay. That guy looks like an insurgent to me. And look at that. He's getting in the trunk of his car. He's probably getting ready to pull out an IED. Wait. Nope. He's pulling out a tire. This is odd. I wonder if he's got an IED in that. No, he's changing a flat, The guy's not an insurgent. He's changing a flat tire, and pretty soon everybody that looks like they're doing something nefarious is really just going about their everyday life. And on that operation, I didn't see, one insurgent, and I was probably watching Sesame Street for that 8-hour period of time. And that was a difficult part of it because, there's just a bunch of Iraqis trying to live their lives in the middle of this huge mess. And so, yeah, it's just completely different than going after somebody in uniform in the first Gulf War, and they were driving tanks and all that to an insurgent battle, which they're tricky.
Yeah. Is that part of that institutional memory we were talking about that you nearly lost, the ability to deal with the insurgency rather than regimented military forces in the US military? Do you think it came close to that point?
Yes, absolutely. But it comes close to that point because when you lose people that were actually in combat that can validate what they're thinking, people will start to spin stuff and they'll say, well, this Vietnam vet told me this, and they tweak it towards whatever they think their tactic or narrative should be. We got real focused in the SEAL teams on doing direct action missions. And that was like going out at night, looking for bad guys, kicking down doors and grabbing them and bringing them back, and then starting that whole cycle again. And when Jocko and Leif deployed in 2006, they looked, they're like, hey, we've been doing this for several years and nothing's changed. Maybe we should try something different. And so they shifted the model of what the SEAL teams were doing. Instead of doing their own deal, which is, it's a sexy mission. It's a lot of fun, blowing doors down and grabbing bad guys, to going out during the days and supporting the conventional forces that are doing a really dangerous, dirty, rough job, and giving them direct support. And you don't get a lot of credit for that personally, but they actually started to move the needle where, if you look at the sine wave that was violence in Ramadi, they had an effect with it, where it's the raid mentality. While it's necessary, if that's the only thing you're doing, it's not working. It's not going to work, and it wasn't working.
Yeah,
at least in Ramadi.
Yeah, how much of your deployments, particularly maybe towards the second part, but was there a lot of what's known as the hearts and minds? Were you doing that as well as the kind of patrols and the kicking down doors and grabbing bad guys, or was it not at that stage yet?
No, I mean, the military as a whole, going into 2005, was definitely had realized that the battle space was the hearts and minds of the populace. And so if we wanted them to stop tacitly supporting the insurgents, we needed to let them know that we were their friends and we had their best interest in mind. And you can't do that if you're just sitting on your base, or if your patrols are 9 armored vehicles roaring through town as fast as you can. So there has to be some risk taken. And that built on, taking the Iraqis out in the street. It built on us when we were going out on patrols in Afghanistan and taking Afghanis with us, and understanding what their culture was and what's important to them, and making sure that, we weren't creating 5 more Taliban for every one that we were taking off the battlefield. And that's, they understand it. If an insurgent is shooting at you from their compound and you drop a bomb on their compound and level it, a lot of the Afghanis are like, yeah, I get that. But if you go into a compound and sometimes we get bad intel, and you're rough with everybody, you're short with them, you don't look and say, okay, hey, wait, this was a bad target, and you don't adjust how you're dealing with everybody, you're just going to make them all mad. So yeah, so there's that.
How different would Iraq or Afghanistan been, Jason, if the rules of engagement were different in the first instance? How different could it have been? How frustrating are they?
Everybody has always been frustrated with the rules of engagement. Going back to probably, I don't think like Genghis Khan's guys were frustrated with it because they didn't have any, because they just killed everyone. And so they are frustrating. It's a real balance, because there is a way that we need to behave on the battlefield. And behaving as a complete, utter savage where you're just killing everybody is not helpful. And in the long term, it's not going to result in a win. Now, there was a period of time in Afghanistan where I feel like the leadership at the higher levels wasn't listening and second guessing everything the people that on the ground were telling them. And that was problematic. And the apex of it is, if you understand what Dakota Meyer was, one of our Medal of Honor recipients, and his story is absolutely gut-wrenching to listen to, where they were asking for a medevac to get wounded out, and they were getting second guessed. Well, who do you want to get out? What service are they in? They're asking for artillery fire and being refused that, combined armed support, which every force should have when they go into the field. But everyone had just lost trust with everybody else and had gotten to a point where those rules of engagement did hamstring everybody. The bottom line is, what does winning look like in Iraq and Afghanistan? And did we have the will to actually win? I don't know what those answers are. There's a lot of factors that fit into all these things. I tell you that we have to have a dialogue with the enemy at some point, if there's going to be peace, because half of Afghanistan, it's not like the Taliban is some party. The Taliban is half of Afghanistan. That's their culture. It's their way of life. And so we have to be able to find some kind of middle ground with them. And there you have it. You look at, I'm only vaguely aware of what was going on in Northern Ireland because I didn't live through it. But I talked to a lot of people who were there, and there was horrible violence there for a long time. But it wasn't until they were able to transition to actually a political solution to where now there's peace there, right?
Yep.
And that looks like you saying to somebody, I know that you've spilled some of the blood of people on my side, and we just need to move past that at some point, or we're never going to get out of this cycle of violence. And all those need to be factored in.
I believe in Ireland, in Southern Ireland anyway, I believe there's like a new wave of young guys, kind of, getting back into it, and I don't think they would take an awful lot to be violence again in Ireland. I think it's still very fragile, very, very. I mean, I boxed over in Belfast, and there's still armored Land Rovers on the streets, and you're told not to go to this area, and between the Catholic and the Protestant bit, there's big no man's land with fences and barbed wire. It's peaceful, but not completely settled. Is how I would say it is. There's still some stuff there, but how do you solve decades of violence in a few years? It's not easy, is it?
No, it's not. It's got to be better than it was, and the only way you got to do that is through honest communication where people are talking, because communication cleans everything up so nicely, because we're always making assumptions about what we think other people are thinking. And so the only thing that cleans that up is to say, hey, here's what I'm actually thinking here, and what are you thinking, and where can we come to an agreement, instead of just because typically, I'll tell you, I think your mind is going to assume the worst about what other people are thinking when you come up with, because you haven't been communicating what they're thinking.
Yeah, I think it was it might have been Jocko on a podcast. He was saying, when I think they had been in Ramadi, and speaking to the average Iraqi, they just wanted to fix a roof, change oil in their car and go play soccer with their kids. And the average person was very much like the average American. It was just that there's this really horrible element hiding amongst them. But the average person was very similar.
And this is why I've come up with a new rule 6 months ago, and I've quit using generalizations to describe people, because I found that everybody I talk to, when it gets right down to what is important to them and what their values are, pretty much everybody is almost the same. Yeah. And there's a small amount of deviation, but it's so small that it doesn't matter. And so I find, like, if I talk to one of my friends who's well, I'm really central, but I used to be more conservative. And one of my friends that I would describe as a progressive or as a liberal, and if I just think of him as is his first name instead of the liberal or the progressive, that I can tone down the conversations that I have with them, and then 9 times out of 10, we're not that far off. Yeah. And we're close enough that he's still a dear friend of mine, and I think that's the problem you run into when you use generalizations. Then you dehumanize people, and then you behave in ways that you wouldn't normally behave. Kind of like on the internet, people say stuff to other people in these chat rooms and things that they would never say in real life. And not because they might get punched in the face, but because they know they could see the hurt that their words would actually express on the other person's face and immediately regret it. And so that's one of the tricky things about A, generalizations and dehumanizing people, and B, just how we all figured out how to use social media and the internet. And people just not being empathetic enough.
Actually, that makes me laugh because I've seen something today. I don't know if you've seen this. It was getting shared today. It was a fan giving Paul Felder, the UFC fighter, shit. And he just said, you shouldn't return. You should stick to commentating. You're done. You're finished as a fighter. And Paul Felder just replied saying, "Does it make you feel good saying that to somebody? Would you say this to my face?" And the fan said, "No, because you'd beat the shit out of me. That's why I'm saying it." It was one of those things where, okay, I'll get. You have to give him that one. At least he was honest about the whole thing. It was just so funny. It was so funny. At least he was honest about it. But yeah, it's funny. Like you say, most people just want same things. They want to, look after their family. See kids, maybe see friends, have a couple of beers and have fun. Everybody really wants the same thing in life. You just get all this extra noise that is, bullshit, really. That causes all the issues. And you have to look. If you actually look at all the craziness just now, on all sides, people ripping everything down. All they really want to do is protect, their friends who are a minority or something. I don't know why we can't make this easier. Why do we have to have all this craziness? Why can we not? And this is where it comes back into, I think, the leadership of somebody saying, okay, let's everybody calm down. Everybody calm down. Let's not smash windows up and let's not rip statues down just now. What is everybody looking for here? What's the end goal? And there doesn't seem to be any. It seems in America that they're allowing the police to be defunded, and it just seems madness. Where it seems like they need a leader to say, everybody stop. Okay, calm down, and this is how we're going to do this.
Yeah, no one would listen, and the thing is that we go through these big points of friction that this nation is going through right now is just part of us working through some real issues we've got with racism, and I have no idea what the experiences are of anybody of color, and I'm hoping that's the right word, but I don't know what their experiences are. So I could make assumptions what their experiences are, but I don't know. And so I think it's a time where I've been trying to shut my mouth and listen and see if they've got a validation in their points. It was in the early 60s when we got rid of segregation in this country. That's not that long ago. And there's a lot of people that are obviously, their parents lived through it. They heard stories of it. And that segregation is straight up institutional racism, and I don't think it was until the 70s when they finally got rid of it because the Civil Rights Act got held up in the courts in Boston. So it's something that's real. It's there in a lot of people's minds. And there are good cops and there are bad cops. There are good soldiers, there are bad soldiers. They're good and bad of everything. And we all just need to do the best we can to move forward and see how we're going to get better. We kind of seem to have riots every 4 to 6 years here. These are pretty big, but it's something that just kind of happens with, and I don't know if it's a factor of people, living in cities, because it's in areas of high population density. And I think you get in those areas with high population density where people get that same, there can be a lack of a sense of community. Yeah. And I don't know what the right answer is. I'm just trying not to sweat the small stuff. And I know that there's a lot of people that are angry, and there's a lot of people that maybe have some good reasons to be angry. And let's listen and let's work through this. Will we still be in riots in another 2 months? I don't think so, or maybe we are, and maybe we work through it.
Yeah. There seems to be as well a bit of a collective energy around cities, isn't there? Which can sometimes be positive, that buzz of a big city. But I think as well it can be negative and kind of sort of generate that friction.
Well, yeah, we're always going to over adjust. The pendulum's here, and then we're going to swing it too far the other way, and then it's going to go back this direction, and it's it just keeps adjusting. But here's the thing. I don't know anybody that is walking around screaming or yelling or treating anybody in a way that they shouldn't be treated. Yeah. I do have friends that they don't always use the politically correct things to say, and then it's on me to go, bro, you can't talk like that anymore. That's how we all adjust and move in the same direction. There's a lot of people worried about masculinity going away, and that we're making our kids too soft. I don't know. I don't think my kids are soft. I look around at a lot of the kids that I live in a real rural area. They don't seem to be all that soft. They seem to be good to go. I mean, our forefathers that started this nation were wearing wigs and leotards and powder in their faces. They were basically prancing around in drag. And so how masculine is that? Masculine enough to have a revolution and get this done. So a lot of this stuff, I think, is just people are being aggravated for the sake of being aggravated. And I'm not minimalizing people's complaints with the whole racism thing. I'm just saying in general, people are just a little too wigged out.
So how do you think everybody could learn from your leadership stuff? How do you think everybody could? Is there something in there for everybody to reassess and reevaluate to move forward?
Yeah, it all starts with you. So when Jocko and Leif came up with the concept of extreme ownership, and they didn't come up with the concept, it's a concept that people have been talking about for a long time, but when they started down this path of leadership, the first place they looked is at themselves. How can I improve myself first, and then start radiating that example out? So, before I start bad-mouthing any other politicians or somebody else, I need to look at, okay, here's what I don't like about said politician, and where do I exhibit those same traits, and how can I fix them? Because that's the only person I can affect is myself, right? And the ultimate freedom that I have is how I react to any given situation I'm presented with. And I'm stealing this stuff from the Stoics, from General Mattis, from Jocko and Leif. It all starts with us right here. It's the thing that Admiral McCraven said at that commencement speech. It's wonderful. He said, you want to change the world, start by making your bed. Start by cleaning your own house. Start there and then work your way towards all these bigger issues. But you can only fix, you're the only person you have control over. Fix that first, then start getting after all this other stuff. Now, what does that mean? That means that I'm working on myself, and then when I'm with my buddy and he says something maybe kind of sexist or something, do I go, well, that's on him to fix? No, that's on me to go, hey, bro, it's just not cool to talk like that anymore. It's not a cool way to be. You know, I think that's it.
It's it's one of these things that I see quite regularly as, people who, say, they want to fix it, the environment, they want to heal the world, but they'll walk past a plastic bottle lying in the street. And you go, oh, I mean, okay, so you want to fix, you want to get rid of petrol cars and everybody run about in battery cars, but I mean, you can't even pick up, because oh well, it's not mine. Yeah, that's not the issue though. The issue is it's there. And so there's a lot of this. I think a lot of sort of social posturing goes on with this stuff, where, as you've just said, you have to make sure your own house is in order. So we can't fix the world until we make sure there's no rubbish, trash around about our house. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I suppose as well, people. Do you see as well, just being sort of ages in our generation, shall we say, Jason, that you see people sort of have that abdication of responsibility. Like, well, it's not me that's it's not me that's done that, so it's on you to fix that, or...
Yeah, I don't know. See, I've got a different life experience because I've been in the military for the last, 30 years, and the last 20 years we've been at war. So I've seen like people complain about the millennials. Well, I'll tell you, none of the millennials and the generation after that, I don't have any complaints with them. They were good to go. They did a hard job for crappy pay under crappy conditions and really didn't complain that much. So I'm hesitant to say that there are generational issues, because again, that would be breaking my rule about just not making generalizations. And I think anybody, if you sit down and have an honest conversation with them and actively listen, that you'll find out you're heading in the same direction, or you can get an idea to stick, and you can plant a little seed with them and get ideas to stick and get better. But back to fixing yourself, most people are going to pick up things from the example that we all set as opposed to what we say.
Yeah, absolutely. So just just because you were talking about the millennials there, so what would be the differences from the Vietnam vets you encountered when you first entered to the young guys when you left? What was the differences in them as soldiers and as humans?
So, I bet you if you hit them at the same time in their military experience and their combat experience, they would have been exactly the same. When I joined, I was at a different area in the spectrum of my maturity and my experience levels. I usually didn't ask why a lot. I would just do things. And the millennials, the younger generation tends to ask why more, and that's a good thing, because why not? If someone asks you why and you say, because this is the way we've always been doing it, or because I said so, is a weak answer. It's not taking an honest look at whatever your procedure is or whatever it is and saying, okay, well, why are we doing this way? Is there a way to do it better? It lacks a lot of humility. So there's that. But shoot, the young men and women that I served with, coming up, they gosh, when I measure myself against them, so I take the Jason Gardner that was at the same level that they are, and I think they were much better leaders than I was, and more competent. Anyhow,
this is why we like to speak to military guys, because you have this unique perspective of different people at different generations, and it's an interesting thing. I know, just to touch on something there, one of my military friends, an RAF guy, was a weapons specialist, and he said, when he left the military and he went to, he was doing engineering and stuff. He's an ejector seat specialist, and he was working on a job. He told me this, and he says, this old guy was doing something, and he said, "You're doing that wrong." And the guy, the older guy said, "I've been doing it this way all my life." And he went, "Well, you've been doing it fucking wrong all your life then, haven't you?" He goes, he was 100% wrong, but an old guy had done it a certain way, and he said, well, that's not the best way to do this. And I just said, "Well, you've been doing it wrong." It was one of those things where, you can be wrong. Sometimes you have to say, "I am wrong."
Absolutely, and maybe the way to because walking up to someone who's been doing something for 30 years and telling them they're doing it wrong is kind of like hitting them across the face with a dead fish, right? if you want them to change, or see what he's doing, there might have been a different approach to that. And crazy.
We tend to not be the most diplomatic people in Scotland. We're usually quite. I don't know if this is your experience from any Scots you've encountered, Jason, in the military, but we tend to be quite feisty and quite fiery. We don't generally be the best, most diplomatic people.
Yeah, and then again, if that's how everyone's operating, then it's no factor saying it to them because everyone's got pretty thick skin.
Did you did you do any work with any British guys?
So no, been around them. Had some guys from the UK working in joint commands with us, but I was never actually in the field. But I was always struck by their professionalism of everybody from the UK, because they just had everything dialed in really, really well. Did a lot of work with the Australians, and again, super competent, super professional. Did quite a bit of work with the Poles and the Danish as well, and again, really impressed with those guys and the Canadians.
I think
they're great.
We had Clint Emerson on, who was a SEAL as well. You know Clint, and he said he worked with some Polish guys, and they were pretty legit. Yeah, really good.
Oh
guys.
Yeah.
Yep. Quite interesting. So yeah.
You moved into the training world as well, didn't you, Jason? Was that towards the end of your career that you started doing the training for the Navy SEALs? So
I was in and out of it, and I was always involved with the sustainment training for SEALs getting ready to deploy, as opposed to the selection course that we have where guys are running around with boats on their heads and logs. So being at a SEAL team is really burning your candle at both ends. Right now, you're on a 2-year cycle. So you do a 1.5 year long workup, which has you gone away from home almost as much as the stinking deployment. It's just in smaller chunks spread out. And then you go do a 6-month deployment. Then you come back and you do all that again. And 3, maybe 4 iterations of that is about max for anybody's attention span, and they just don't have enough balance in their life. And so they have, you'll take a break and go to a training command where you're training other guys going through training, or you can go work at one of our other places to work, like at our selection course, or some of our specialty schools where they teach individually schools like sniper school or comms course or stuff like that. And so it was spattered throughout my career where I was in and out of the SEAL team, and then over at a training command and out of the SEAL team, and then back at the training commands. The thing, that I love being a sniper was that was my bread and butter. That's what I loved doing. And so I ran a bunch of our sniper selection courses, or was an instructor for them, and then was teaching all the advanced sniper sustainment training for the West Coast SEAL teams for 3 years at our training detachment before basically at some point you just promote out of being a sniper. And I didn't get to do it well, but did a good job of managing the guys underneath me, and then got super lucky, like in my 2009 deployment to Afghanistan. I got to go out into the field, even though I was a senior chief in charge of 2 SEAL platoons. We had both platoons out in the field just getting after it wholesale. And so I had the opportunity to get back on the rifle. One of our we went into this town called Marja, which was just complete Taliban town. They owned it. No one had been into the town until we went in there in 2009. The Marines cleared it in 2010, but they had such freedom of movement. They were consolidating all the opium there and then converting it into heroin and shipping it down to Pakistan, because that's how the Taliban was funding the war. And the Green Berets came up with this operation where they were going to go in there in the middle of town and grab 4 square blocks and just hold all this opium in the middle of this Taliban town. And, they said, we need some more people to do this. You want to come with? And we're like, heck yeah. So we went in there, 4-day-long firefight. The only time the fighting stopped was in the middle of the night when, we have the advantage because we have night vision. We're just bombing everything. And then in the heat of the day, so basically from noon till about 4 p.m., it's too hot. The Taliban basically quits fighting. The rest of the time, we were just getting after it. And I've got pictures of, we had in one of the compounds we were holding was a blocking position. And we had a 50 cal machine gun set up in the window. And you can look at the entire floor is just covered with brass from us shooting back wave after wave of assaulters. It was incredible. The guys in the element in a building that was about 100 yards from my building, they had this awesome thing called a ALGL, which is a 40 millimeter grenade launcher. That's a machine gun. Thunk, 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 thunk. It's pumping it down. And it has this crazy computerized sight that goes on the top of it, right? So you adjust the machine gun and you're looking at this video screen, and then there's a little cursor on the target you want to shoot, and you hit a button and it automatically lasers to shoot and does all the elevation for the ballistics of those 40 millimeter grenades you're getting ready to launch, and does the adjustment, and then you can just boom, send a 4-round burst there. So these guys are mixing it up with these Taliban fighters that are a tree line, and there's this we got aircraft overhead, and they're talking to the aircraft after they just launched like 4 rounds at this fighting position, and they say, hey, can you give us a battle damage assessment? Can you let us know how effective our rounds were? And the aircraft comes back over the radio, and they said, 2 enemy killed in action, 1 ran away, on fire. So, I was really fortunate, as even when I promoted out of some of the tactical roles, I was still able to be out there on the field with the guys mixing it up. And I struggle with this stuff because you've heard me say, hey, look at everybody else's opinions and try to be kind. And then there's this other aspect of me that is just bloodthirsty, for a lack of a better term. And I just try and keep him under control.
It's funny because you really came alive there when you were talking about going into battle. You absolutely came alive. It was just like a critic Chris going, fuck yeah!
Yeah, it's I get really excited about that, and it's like
I am extremely happy you guys exist.
I'd rather be.
How do you
Yeah.
control your adrenaline during a 4-day firefight then, Jason? Because like Chris said, your eyes came alive. I could see it in your eyes that you were like, yeah. So how do you control your adrenaline over the course of 4 days? Is it just a sheer adrenaline wave for 4 days, or?
It just you get that initial spike, and then once you're over the hump, then you're just like, oh, look at that, I almost got hit by that last bullet. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit better cover. And there isn't a huge adrenaline spike. There's an initial push, and then after that, you just get a little bit numb to it. There was another position we were in where we were almost overrun, and I was convinced I was going to die there. And initially, as I'm laying flat out on my belly behind a small rock wall, and I'm looking up and I'm seeing bullets striking these rocks like 10 inches from my head, and watching the rock start to erode, I was like, oh, okay, this is it. The trajectory this is on, I'm going to get shot. I'm probably going to die here. And then set that aside and got on to doing what I had to do, because that's what you have to do to keep moving forward. And then later on, you'll go like, whew, man, that was almost it. I got to question some of my life decisions right now.
Is there any thought? I've always wondered about this. In those situations, is there any thought of, well, if I'm going out, I'm not going out lying on my belly. I'm going to go out fucking shooting back. Is there any? How does the process work in your head?
So it's interesting you said that. That's what I think. However, I'm gonna quote Conan: "I don't fear death, but only a fool invites it." And when we were laying there, the guy right next to me, who happened to be our joint tactical air controller, he's like, "We got to get up and shoot back." And so I started lifting my head up, and I'm like, "Nope." I'm like, we can't shoot back right now because we can't even stick our faces up there. I would no sooner put my face into a table saw than I would have to put my head up in that situation. Now, we got some aircraft in that was able to startle the Taliban, and to where they had to be a little bit less aggressive, and it gave us a breathing room to get up. And as soon as we could, everyone got up and started shooting back. And then we were able to manage that whole firefight a little bit better, because we were in a position to start returning effective fire, and hadn't completely lost the initiative, which initially we had lost the initiative, and it wasn't looking good until if those aircraft had been 10 minutes late, we would have been overrun for sure.
Yes, that's something that I've always thought about. When you see, whenever you've seen some of these horrible, terror attacks, and always runs through my head is, how would you react in that situation? Do you just sit there and wait for something terrible to happen, or do you go, fuck it, this is not the way I'm going to try and do something? That's, I've always thought about it. Thankfully, I've never had to experience it, but it's just, it's interesting to hear somebody's perspective on that.
Yeah, it's so hard to tell. Like, you see a lot of the war movies where people just fold under the pressure, and I always wondered, is that going to be me in combat? What is it going to be like? I'm going to fold under pressure. And what saves us in the military is they put us in some really, really intense training, so that when you're actually in those situations, it's not for the first time. Let's talk about the jujitsu parallel here for a second. My wife, because she trains jujitsu, if some guy grabs her, it's not going to be the first time some sweaty, strange dude has grabbed her. And so her brain is not going to process it the same way that if it was the first time, you're going to completely panic. And 90% of the population is going to lock up in that panic situation. But I'm going to venture that because you do roll and you're going with your buddy who's trying to murder you, that, hey, you're going to hear an explosion. You're probably going to get down and then you're going to start looking around trying to figure out what's going on. Now, if you're smart and you've thought about this kind of stuff ahead of time, and you're like, okay, well, I hear a shot or somebody scream, I'm going to get down, and then I'm going to start looking for an exit, because the best thing for me to do next is going to be to run and move. It's harder to shoot a moving target, and you're harder to stab if you're moving too. So that's what you're going to do, and then figure out how you can help after that. But if you're playing that around, that little scenario around in the back of your head, like, oh, okay, I'm at this concert, or I just walked into this restaurant. What happens if this? Where's the exit? Those are things that everybody can run through that in your head. So then when it happens for real, it's not the first time that it happens to you. But the edge that you've got being on the mats is that, it's anything can go there. So you're kind of already used to those unpredictable situations. Talk about it with your kids too. I talk about this stuff with my kids. I'm like, hey, all right, here's what's going to happen. If we hear a loud shot, I want you to get down, and then I need you to look at me, because I'm going to be trying to figure out where we're going to run. And then we're going to move all together. I need you to be tight on me.
Yeah.
So I've at least got that in their heads.
Yeah.
I suppose it's key as well in those stressful situations that simple instructions, you don't want to overload with lots of information. It's just such a simple one. Get down, look at dad. You know? And let you, with your experience and your maturity and everything else, worry about the other stuff. That's such a simple instruction to give your kids. Get down, look at dad. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, the Jocko and Leif developed the 4 laws of Jocko developed 4 laws of combat, and the second one is simple. Cover and move, simple, prioritize and execute, decentralized command. And that simple is huge.
Yeah. Yeah, especially in situations.
I've take this back to a really basic level, not a military level, but when I was boxing, Jason, I used to like my coach to give me 1 or 2 instructions. Give me some water, put a cold towel on my head, and give me 1 or 2 instructions. Don't complicate it. 1 or 2 things. Okay, you're eating this right hand. You have to slip to the left or right, or whatever it was. That's it. Don't give me you're doing this, you're doing that, he's doing this. Keep it really simple, and try and get out of it. But as you're saying with the Jocko thing is, they can be extremely complicated, but you can make them really simple, really easy. So sort of these life and death situations. Like you say, the best way to get out of a sticky situation is get out of the sticky situation.
Sure, and it takes a conscious effort to just simplify everything, and so that's another good thing to think about.
Yeah. It's also true what you were saying about even just being in jiu-jitsu and having the experience of someone grabbing you, someone pressuring you. Because I'm sure maybe the first time on the mat, I know I remember feeling it, and I've seen it happen with people that have came into the gym since me and Chris have been training. The first time you maybe mount someone with heavy pressure, and they kind of get claustrophobic and they tap, and you're like, I didn't actually do it. No, it was just the sheer weight of something on you. And people don't have that exposure day to day, or week to week, or however way. They've never experienced it before, and it puts that panic in that you can't even think of simple things like a hip escape or whatever it might be. Do you know what I mean? Something that seems quite simple looking back, but they just panic with the pressure, or whether that's physical pressure, whether that's emotional pressure of the situation. It's that pressure, in whichever way you want to think about it, that results in bad decisions. If someone mounts you, you try and bench press them off, and you've got Chris that weighs however much Chris weighs these days. You're not going to be able to bench him off because Chris just goes dead weight, and eventually my arms are going down, and Chris is back or he arm bars me, or whatever it's going to be.
Yes, absolutely, and it's that pressure that makes us improve across the board.
Is it pressure creates diamonds? I think is the phrase.
Yeah,
It's
great
absolutely true.
analogy.
Have you had the pleasure to roll with Jocko yourself?
No,
No.
no, I haven't rolled with him yet. I haven't had the opportunity.
You should. I mean, that would be something super cool to roll with. Roll Jocko would be
Just
really
get
cool.
mauled.
So, yeah. But he's,
It would just
yeah,
be.
'cause
It would all
it's,
depend on his mood that day.
have you have you rolled with a black belt at all?
Oh yeah, at the
Yeah.
at the gym that I trained at in San Diego, I rolled with the black belt there,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
for a white belt, you're rolling with the black belt. A lot of times they're just
Yeah.
most of the time they're just he'd be coaching me the whole time. Hey, okay, try putting your hand here, grab my gi here, because it's just it's no factor for them to just wrap
Yeah.
you up.
Yeah. It's the first time that I rolled with our professor, it didn't make sense. Just just the pressure that it can create, and it actually got worse when I rolled with our professor Dan when I was a white belt to when I got to when I got a blue belt, and then once I got a blue belt, I had more of an idea of I was really trying to pass guard, and I was being a little more aggressive, and then he switched, and then it was like, oh shit. That was a mistake. Once he realised that I kind of had some idea of what was going on, then he really put some pressure on. It was it doesn't make sense. Yeah, it doesn't make sense at all. Just top pressure, and it's horrible, absolutely horrible. So, but we always go back.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We always go back.
We're the same as yourself just now, Jason. Our gym's closed because Scotland's still in a full lockdown situation. So we're hoping to get back into the gym in the next few weeks, all going well. And it's been a long 3 months with no mats.
Yeah.
They'll get there.
It has. This thing is just crazy. I don't know where it's going to go. I think that we're getting ready to go into. The math all seems to indicate that we'll probably be in another lockdown here in the U.S. in the next couple weeks.
Yeah.
I've got a friend I served in the Navy with. He wasn't a SEAL, but he picked it up and it laid him up he was in the hospital for 5 days, and I guess it was really touch and go. He's 50, so and doesn't have any pre-existing conditions that I'm aware of. So it's crazy.
Were you guys okay? I know you said you're quite rural where you are. Did you have any like strict lockdown, or was it kind of not so bad where you are?
They locked our county down and for a period of time, and so like non-essential stores like nail salons or bars and restaurants, restaurants could still do takeout, but everything else was closed. No gathering of groups of like 10 or more. They've scaled that back, so restaurants are at half capacity. They're asking everybody to wear masks, but people are just not doing it for whatever reason. And we'll see. Now, our lives where we're at really didn't change that much because we're 40 minutes from town, and it hasn't impacted our county that bad, only because I don't think it's gotten to us yet. It's inevitable that it gets here, and then we'll just have to work through it. I know that in rural areas, it tends to be even a lower mortality rate, I think, because the exposure level people are getting just isn't as much as it is with high dense areas.
Yeah, we were like along the same lines where we are. We're in small villages, sort of 20 minutes from Edinburgh. So there's not really enough people. If I go out for a run or go to the shop, you might see 10 people. You don't see an awful lot of people. So we are kind of lucky where we are. But the big cities are, we're crazy as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
So, but like you, I don't really watch the news or pay attention to anything. I just kind of try and make sure, I've done everything possible to look after myself and take it from there, really. That's
Yeah.
not much else you can do in those situations. So, but yeah, hopefully it doesn't come back with a vengeance, and we can get back to jiu-jitsu and practice murdering each other again.
Yeah.
But
Good
yeah.
times.
Well, I'm thinking about going watching sunset, so I need to go.
Nice.
Yeah,
Awesome.
We've actually gone just over the hour as well.
Yeah, I'm looking outside my window and it looks like it's going to be a really nice sunset. So I've got about half an hour. So I want to run to a little loch round about where I am and go watch the sunset. So I'm starting to run out of things to say anyway. There's only so many things you can say before you start sounding ridiculous. So for me,
Yeah.
anyway.
Just before we wind down then, Jason, if people are looking for you or to find out a bit more, where can they find you on social media or anywhere else?
So, I'm the most active on the Instagram at jason.n.gardner, Gardner. I work for Echelon Front, and you can find out about Echelon Front, Jocko and Leif's company, where we solve leadership or solve problems through leadership. That's at echelonfront.com. And then my wife, Iris, has a YouTube channel where she kind of showcases a lot of the stuff that we do, living in a rural area. And the channel's name is IrisGardner, IrisGardner. And she runs like 7 to 10 minute videos that it's just the outdoors, the horses and kids and wildlife and stuff like that.
I like the sound. I like the sound of that. That sounds interesting. I'm a kind of nature guy, and I like all that. Obviously, I'm going to watch sunsets. I like all that kind of stuff, so I'll go and check that out myself. But yeah, it was a real pleasure for us to speak to you, Jason. Hopefully, we weren't too dumb for you and didn't make an arse of ourselves too much. But it was great fun.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. I mean, that hour and a half just flew by.
It did, yeah. We're kind of ticking up towards that. Thank you so much for sparing an hour and a half, Jason. I appreciate you're a busy man, a family man with young kids, and obviously with your work you're doing with Jocko and Leif up at Echelon Front. So we appreciate you taking the time to do that. We'll tag these Instagrams. I know me and Chris are about to go and subscribe to your wife's YouTube channel. We'll try and get some of our guys to follow as well. Thank you so much. Episode 27 in the Kangans. Jason, thank
you very much.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Thanks, fellas. Out here.
The Silly Goose Gang Podcast.